path ahead is unclear today. That's the honest reality.
In the wake of the swift and resounding referendum defeat,
we need to take a little bit of time to examine the fallout here and think about a constructive way forward.
The government grappling with how to reboot reconciliation.
I don't think Saturday night's result was a vote against progress.
I think if you look at the way in which both the yes and no cases were argued, we can take from the referendum an increased resolve to act on closing the gap and to act on reconciliation.
The opposition leader lashing the PM.
He was warned not to go down this path of division, and he bears the responsibility for where our country is today.
While walking back his pledge to hold a second referendum on constitutional recognition.
All of our policy is going to be reviewed, and I think it's clear that the Australian public is probably over the referendum process for some time.
People need to look in the eyes of Aboriginal people in remote communities who did want change, and now we've got to find some answers for them.
The result and the campaign making global headlines.
Crushing Indigenous hopes, Australia rejects voice referendum.
Has Australia missed its opportunity to move on from its racist past?
A major setback to the country's efforts for reconciliation.
While the government attempts to draw a line in the sand.
Australians did not accept the constitutional change that was proposed, but no one is arguing for the status quo.
Bitter recriminations across the aisle.
Why did he proceed when it was clear his vanity project was going so disastrously wrong?
I thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition for her rhetoric.
The $450 million referendum was against advice and resulted in our country being divided.
It's interesting to get a question from the Leader of the Opposition about division. The Leader of the Opposition has never seen a policy that he doesn't oppose. The Leader of the Opposition is all trailer, no movie. He never actually sticks to a commitment, which is why he doesn't recognise conviction when he sees it in someone else.
Well, clearly, I mean, people now want to play the blame game, and I think you probably have to do that, and then turn our attention to how we fix the problems of the Indigenous communities.
Do you have to play the blame game?
Yes, I think you do. The Yes campaign ran the worst campaign probably in political history. They started out with a 70-point lead, turned it into a 40-point loss. They had $20 million to make slick ads and didn't make slick ads that convinced people like me, who was going to vote no, to change my mind and vote yes. The elites who started lecturing Middle Australia on how they should vote. I mean, who in their right mind gets the big four banks to start telling people to vote yes? These are the same banks that are crippling people with interest rates at the moment. People can't pay their mortgages.
Or Qantas in this particular moment.
All of those corporates that were involved. The sporting bodies, the AFL, the NRL, telling people how to vote. That stuff was just murderous for the Yes campaign. And then you have to look at the Prime Minister. I think the hubris of him on election night saying, I'm going to introduce the Uluru Statement from the Heart when I can, the moment I can, and I'll have a referendum. He just got carried away and he couldn't carry the people of Australia, and it will be on him eventually.
I feel like as well, the push for the voice became a moral argument rather than a practical one, and that's where you started to lose people. It's really interesting to see the maps on how Australians voted. Western Sydney, and certainly the Voice campaign, was hoping that migrant communities would support this, but in Western Sydney, in the electorate of Fowler, where more than 60% of the population was born overseas, they resoundingly rejected the Voice. And the leaders say it's not because they don't want better outcomes for Indigenous people, but they're battling cost of living, and they were confused by the concept, this abstract concept of the Voice. That's it. And the ad campaigns were directed at inner city voters who were already going to vote yes, not the undecideds. Just explain it.
Well, you've done a bit of a deep dive on some of the demographics. Yeah. What's it show?
Well, it actually backs up kind of what Sarah's saying. So income's a factor. Basically, it kind of ends up being the elite argument. The more elite sector of society you are in, the more likely you were to vote yes. Yeah. The biggest dividing line seems to have been education. So if you are in a seat that had high levels of tertiary education, a bachelor or postgrad, then you were at the very top end of the yes vote. And if you had the lowest levels of tertiary education, you were at the low end of the yes vote. And that's not to say people who are educated know what they're doing and people who don't have tertiary education don't. It's about the style of the message, I think. And the concept of a voice is... I can totally see why you would propose it. If you go through the history, you go through the experience of the people who designed it or who came up with the idea, it actually makes perfect sense. But most people haven't been on that journey. And when you come to them with this idea that's actually quite abstract and complicated, they're going to respond with an instinct, and that instinct is it just doesn't feel.
And then
right.
it doesn't help as well. Then when yes campaigners are calling people, dickheads and dinosaurs because they can't get their heads around it.
One word of warning I have for the coalition: don't start dancing on the grave of this this result, because if you kid yourselves that this is going to be replicated in a federal election, you're wrong.
Do you know the best summary I've heard of this was from a pollster who was doing polling and focus group? They said, comparing this to the same-sex marriage plebiscite, the difference is instinctively Australians will vote to give everyone the same rights, but they are less ready to start engaging in anything where this is for one group of people and this is for another. And you can have your problems with that. You can say, but that's not right, or in this case it's an exception and all that. You can have those intellectual arguments, but in the raw politics of it, I think that's what we found.
But at the end of the day, we've got First Nations people who feel like this vote on them has gone the other way. And they're hurting, and that is a terrible place to be for our country.